Okay, and welcome. Today we're going to talk about the basic principles of Catholic social teaching. And when I say basic, I mean very basic indeed. You will sort of have to understand these principles before we can uh, talk about any other subject. So, in that sense, this is an extremely important lecture. You sort of have to get this one before you get the rest of the class. So if you have any questions at all, be sure to bring them up online in the discussion group or in our discussions in class. However, before we tackle these basic principles, there's an issue we have to deal with. And that issue, we might say, is by what authority? I mean, really, does the church have any authority or competence to address social, political, and economic issues? And in that, we have to start with a cautionary tale. And it involves this handsome fellow by the name of Galileo Galilei. Now, in 1632, Galileo was condemned by the Roman Inquisition for preaching that the earth goes around, rather than, sorry, the sun goes around the earth. Now, this decision has brought great ridicule on the church, and it's been sort of a part of the of every discussion of science and religion since then. So, does the church's rather obvious error in this case prove that there is no relationship between science and religion, and the church just ought to keep her nose out of um, um, science's business? Well, there's certainly, in one sense, you can't avoid it because business certainly needs virtuous people. This is obvious. But can moral terms apply to economic systems? Can systems be virtuous or vicious? We talk about science. We normally don't care about vice or virtue. So if we don't talk about virtue in astronomy or vice in chemistry. Well, how about economics, for example? Can we talk about them there? Well, to answer that, we'll have to ask what kind of a science is economics? To answer that question, we're going to have to deal with some other questions. The division of the sciences, the need for justice, and finally, the erotic economy. I'll know you'll look forward to that. But let's start talking about the division of the sciences. Now, I'm pretty sure you've heard that sciences are divided into the positive and the normative. And the positive sciences deal with number, weight, measure, things like that. Okay. So physics and astronomy, these are positive sciences. No one would doubt it. Normative science, or so the story goes, deals with social norms. So politics, sociology, things like this are normative sciences. But even when we talk about them in that way, we have to ask, are they really sciences at all? Well, is economics then, is it a positive or a normative science? I'm going to suggest to you that the question is meaningless. Why? Because all science, each and every one of them, is both positive and normative. Every science must be normed to some criteria of truth. So let's talk about the sources of scientific truth. And there are always two sources that we deal with. There's an internal source of truth, and this deals with the science's proper subject matter and methodology. By virtue of this internal source, every science is positive. But that's not enough to make it a science. it also needs an external source of truth. Every science must be normed to truths from one or more of the higher sciences. That's what makes it a normative science. The higher science always provides the regulative principle for the lower science. So, for example, biology is responsible to chemistry. No biologist can reach a conclusion contrary to chemistry. But chemistry is responsible to physics. And physics is responsible to mathematics and metaphysics. Each science provides the regulative principles for the lower science. So in order to be a science at all, it must be part of this scientific hierarchy where there's a dependency of the lower upon the higher. So this hierarchy, this organization of knowledge, is what creates science. No science can provide its own truths without becoming circular. So think, for example, of astrology. Now, astrology is perfectly numerate. Astrologers will give you predictions as mathematical as you like. They will give you predictions as precise as you like. However, astrology is only dependent upon its own sources. Its source of truth is that our lives are governed, all things are governed by the stars. That may be true as far as I know. It may be God's own truth. But it cannot be part of the scientific hierarchy. Why? Because there's no higher science that dictates that truth. So, without being part of this scientific hierarchy, astrology can never be science. A higher science, there must be a higher science to provide the regulatory principle for the lower science. So, let's put aside positive and normative, and I want to talk about two realms of the realms of science in a different way: the physical and the humane sciences. Science deals with how objects are moved to their ends. Physical objects are determined by impersonal forces, so the law of gravity. But humans are rational. That means they are self-moved. They move towards ends which they themselves select. Therefore, the basic division is between the physical and the humane sciences, between the sciences of things that are moved by forces outside themselves and the sciences where the objects can move themselves. Now, in the scientific hierarchy, the physical sciences terminate, oddly enough, in physics. But the humane sciences terminate in some view of man. This view will be derived primarily from theology and philosophy, and it will utilize knowledge from psychology, sociology, politics, and other sciences. The humane sciences deal with relationships between human beings. These relationships are guided by the virtues and corrupted by the vices. And the highest of the natural virtues is justice. Hence, the ultimate regulative principle for the humane sciences is justice. All right, so what do we have so far? Science deals with how objects are moved to their ends. There is a hierarchy of the sciences. The higher sciences provide the regulative principles for the lower sciences. So the proper division is not positive and normative, but physical and humane. Physical sciences deals with relationships between physical objects, and it terminates in physics. Humane sciences deal with relationships between humans, and it terminates in theology and philosophy. Its regulative principle is justice. So let's talk about the need for justice then. Justice is the highest of the natural virtues. And it means giving to each person what is due to that person. Now, it's necessary in a purely mechanical sense. Justice, as we'll see, is necessary simply to balance supply and demand. So it doesn't matter what you think of the moral ends of justice, but it's a simple economic necessity. Because economic equilibrium, that balance of supply and demand, depends on equity, a proper distribution of goods, at least enough to clear the markets. Injustice, or which in economics we can call inequity, means that one person gets more than their work is worth. This must mean, since we're dealing with physical quantities, that another gets less. Therefore, wealth without work for some must mean work without wealth for others. Now, I want to make one thing clear here because it's easy to get confused on this point. Inequity and inequality. Inequity is not the same thing as inequality. Some inequality is just and necessary. For example, I don't think all the grades in this class will be equal, but I hope they will be equitable. That is, I hope everybody gets the grade they earned. That being said, unreasonable levels of inequality are the signature of inequity. When we see a lot of inequity, when we see just a few rich and a vast amount of poverty, then we may presume that there are inequities. And inequity makes for economic and social instability. Now, in this regard, the United States is approaching third world levels of inequality. So it is quite proper to ask, is there some inequity going on? We'll deal with this later. All right, so justice then is necessary for economic and social order. It's necessary for the simple balance of supply and demand, that is, economic equilibrium. Injustice destabilizes society and economic order. And the rest of this course will examine this in great detail. All right, finally, here we come to the erotic economy. What do we mean? Let's talk about economics and desire. Economics begins in desire. In Greek, the term for desire is eros, and it refers not just to what you were thinking, it refers to all desires. And we have a range of desires. We must eat, we must love, we must seek the truth. But we can only fulfill our desires by relying on each other. Now, desire in the human condition. The human condition is what we desire, what we want, are things that are perfect and complete. But we live in an imperfect world. Only imperfect and incomplete things are available. Hence, desire always exceeds reality. Which leads to our first economic principle that demand always exceeds supply. There may not be enough money to clear the markets, but there's always enough desire to clear them. The truth is that things never exhaust desire. But let's talk about the structure of desire. Now, modern economics flattens desire to utility, but it says nothing about what makes things useful to us. Desire in this theory is simply irrational. I mean, you like peanut butter, I like jelly. There's no real conversation we can have between us. Desire is irrational. However, I will assert the opposite, that human desire is highly structured and very intelligible. Now, we could give a number of taxonomies of human desire, but I'm going to use Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a very famous explication of desire, but I'm going to present it in a slightly modified form, and I'll show you in just a second. So, can think of human desires as a pyramid. And at the bottom of this pyramid is our physiological desires, our desires for food, shelter, clothing. Obviously, without these, we can't do much of anything. Then the next level of desires is for safety and security. We need to feel safe in our environments. We need to feel that we can, walk outside the dorm and somebody's not going to hit us over the head and take our wallets. Our next level is for love and belonging. We need to be part of something. We need to be loved. The next level up in Maslow's pyramid is the desire for mastery and competence. We need to be good at something, and we need to be recognized for being good at that thing. And then finally, at the top, we need to seek the truth and to seek beauty as ends in themselves. Now here I've departed from Maslow's original hierarchy. Maslow puts self-actualization at the top of the pyramid. I don't even know what that means, how one self-actualizes. But it is, and I've put the search for truth and beauty as ends in themselves, not because they're useful for some other person, for some other reason, but because they're goods in themselves. All right. Now, we can make some distinctions here. We can make a distinction here between quantities and intensities. These lower levels are quantities. Food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security we can think of as quantities. But the tops are qualities or intensities. We can also say that these bottom two layers are allocated and the top four layers are participated. We'll pursue that distinction here in just a little while, so just keep them in mind. But the conclusion is this: human needs are structured. They're complex because they can conflict with each other. And they're competing. The need for food can compete with the need for safety, the need for love, can compete with the need to pursue truth and beauty, etc. But mostly they are intelligible. We can make understandable, intelligent statements about them. All right, eros, eris, and agape. Now, desire, eros, is always going to bring us into conflicts. Again, that's just part of the human condition. And these conflicts will be with others and even with ourselves. We'll have internal conflicts. There's two possible outcomes of conflict. Eris, which is strife, and I like how Greek treats this. There's only one letter difference, an iota difference between eros and eris. Shows how closely connected they are. So, eris is enmity, power struggles. That's eris. The other possible outcome is agape, brotherly love. Brotherly love, agape, is a matter of finding common ground, finding the common good. Well, strife is inevitable in human affairs, but a proper politics and economics seeks the common good. So where are we? Desire in the human condition. Economics is rooted in desire, but these desires can only be fulfilled in cooperation with each other. That is, we cannot make everything we need. We need others to help us make things. We can't supply all our own goods. All material things are imperfect and incomplete, and desire is structured, ordered, and intelligible. Therefore, the conclusion of all of this is that we are dealing with matters in which the Church certainly has the authority to pronounce. All right. So, let's then go on to the basic principles of Catholic social teaching. And we start out, as I said, with the common good. So, where do we find this common good? Well, I want to look at a couple of pairs of terms here. The individual and community, human flourishing, the precondition of order, and the logic of the gift. We often treat the idea of the individual and the idea of the community as contrary terms, as terms that are always going to be in contention with each other. And there's a certain truth for that, but not an ultimate truth. And we often reduce the conversation to a battle between individualism and something or other called socialism. I'm going to maintain that this leads to a toxic political discussion and a distorted economic argument, and one that has no hope of a resolution. And I'm going to propose the common good as the middle term. Let's talk about human flourishing. Human flourishing requires a community, even for basic survival, much less for flourishing. No one reaches his or her full potential by themselves. We need each other. So, the social order depends on pre-existing common goods. For example, the market depends on a social order it cannot create. Every business depends on roads, on water services, on sewer services, on police protection, on national defense, on an electric grid, etc., etc., etc. Social order depends on families, education, shared values, etc. So no one stands alone. Now, individualism posits a society reducible to free exchange alone. But everything we have and everything we are can only be traced to gift. The human being is made for gift, which expresses and makes present his transcendent dimension. Sometimes modern man is wrongly convinced that he is the sole author of himself, his life, and his society. This is a presumption that follows from being selfishly closed in upon himself, and is a consequence, to express it in faith terms, of original sin. This is from Benedict XVI in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate, which we will look at later in the course. All right, so as we gave an anatomy to desire, we can also give an anatomy to the good. And here we're going to be looking at pairs of terms. Foundational and excellent goods, allocated and participated goods. Remember, we met those terms in our Maslow's hierarchy. Real and apparent goods, and particular and common goods. Let's look at these. Foundational goods. Foundational goods are goods that are needed to pursue other goods. So they're good for X. They're good for some reason. So money, for example. Money is needed not as a good in itself, but as in a goods to purchase things necessary for life, for leisure, for advancement, etc. But it has no meaning in and of itself. Excellent goods, on the other hand, are goods pursued for their own sake. Friendship, knowledge, beauty, love, these are excellent goods. They have value in and of themselves. They may also be useful for other purposes, but that's not their primary meaning. And furthermore, there is a pathology of confusing one for the other, of taking money as an excellent good, of pursuing it for itself, or taking friendship as a foundational good, as you make friends just to get good business connections. Well, if that's the only reason you have friends, this is pathological. Okay, allocated and participated goods. What do we mean there? Allocated goods are shared by dividing the whole into parts. So think of the pizza at a party. It's zero sum. The greater number of people at the party, the smaller the slice, each slice of pizza. Participated goods are different. They're shared by the whole. That is, everybody gets all that there is, or everybody can get all that there is. So think of the camaraderie at a party. And participated goods also increase with sharing. Allocated goods decrease with sharing. Participated goods increase with sharing. So think of knowledge. The fact that one person has a lot of knowledge doesn't mean that another person has to have less. In fact, just the opposite. The more both of them have knowledge and share it, the more their knowledge grows. Real and apparent goods. Real goods. Real goods are goods that will actually fulfill their ends. Apparent goods purport to fill an end, but cannot do so. So advertising and propaganda always try to present apparent goods as if they were real goods. All right, particular and common goods. Particular goods, it's a good that is good for a single member or a single group of members of a group. Common goods is a good for each and every member of the group. Now, there can be, and there will be, conflicts between particular and common goods. In fact, that is the tension at the heart of all politics and economics. So, the common good then it's foundational. Common good is necessary for our life together. It's participated. It grows by sharing. It's common. It applies to all. It's real. The common good is never merely apparent. It's particular. It applies to each and every member of the group. And it's allocated because allocations are necessary for participation in the common good, at least in a physical world. And the common good is excellent. It is our life together thought for its own sake. So the common good is the sum of all goods considered socially. All right, now, in regards to the common good, there's a number of questions we have to discuss. So I'm going to start with private property and the universal destination of goods, solidarity and subsidiary. These are important concepts. So you need to grasp these ones from the beginning. They'll occur over and over and over again. Now, modern ideology absolutizes property, whether of the right or the left. So either as an absolute good, as in capitalism, or as an absolute evil, as in communism. Catholic social teaching relativizes property. It is a sacred right, but a limited one, and it is limited precisely by the universal destination of goods. Property, therefore, is a means to an end. It is never an end in itself. Well, the limiting principle is the universal destination of goods. What does this mean? Well, the earth and its gifts are destined for the use of all. Man is a material being, and God provides enough for each person and each family. An economy of scarcity cannot be blamed on God. What we have today is a flattened discussion, and this discussion was flattened, as we'll see later, by John Locke in the 17th century. So our discussion today deals with either private property or state property, socialized property. But there are many different kinds of physical property. There's communal property, there's personal property, private property, collective property, cooperative property. And we'll give a much deeper dive into this later on. And then there are many types of abstract property, for example, intellectual property or equities, the basis of the stock market. Okay, God destined the earth and all it contains for all men and all peoples, so that all created things would be shared fairly by all mankind, under the guidance of justice, tempered by charity. Gaudium et Spes. Ownership is just and legitimate if it serves useful work. It becomes illegitimate when it serves to impede the work of others. Ownership of this kind has no justification and represents an abuse in the sight of God and man. St. John Paul II in Centesimus Annus, another encyclical we will be looking at. So, private property is necessary, but it is not absolute. It is subordinate to the universal destination of goods. It should not be concentrated in a few hands, but spread as widely as possible. Solidarity and subsidiarity. Now, these are the basic political principles of Catholic social teaching. So what is solidarity? Solidarity provides that horizontal dimension of society. So everybody is at the same level in solidarity. So, and it involves a firm determination to work for the common good. That's solidarity. And at its core, it is a practical principle of love. The subsidiarity is the vertical or the hierarchical dimension of society. So there's going to be levels in society, but the higher levels are justified only by the aid, in Latin subsidium, that they can give to lower levels. And this higher level may interfere with the task of the lower level only when necessary and for as long as necessary. Now, everything in Catholic political teaching resolves back to these principles. Note that the principles are geared not so much to individuals, but associations. And at its base, it is the family that is the primary association, the primary cell of society. Subsidiarity then stands the hierarchy the social hierarchy on its head. The higher serves the lower, and everything serves the family. Okay, 2 dimensions of society. Solidarity unites as the horizontal dimension, uniting all men and women at the same level, like that. Subsidiarity is that vertical dimension, making the higher serve the lower, like that. Okay, I hope I wasn't too subtle here. These are the practical principles of love. Now, we can sum all of this up in the phrase, the preferential option for the poor. And this is the acid test of any law or action. How does it affect the least of my brothers? Any law or action that puts the poor at a disadvantage is likely to be corrupt. And the community, including the state, has a special obligation to the poor. All right, now we can finally talk about justice, which is the primary principle of Catholic social teaching. It's the highest of the natural virtues, and it is at the core of everything we'll be talking about. So, justice has 4 parts. There's distributive justice, commutative justice, legal justice, and social justice. Distributive justice. Distributive justice deals with distributions from a group to its members. Now, this group can be the state, it can be a firm, it can be a family, it can be the bowling club, whatever it might be. The standard of justice for distributions and under distributive justice is contribution, need, and merit. What has the person contributed to the group? What are their needs? And what is the merit of their contribution? We'll look into these principles in much more detail later. Commutative justice deals with contracts between individuals, individual persons or individual firms, either one. The standard of justice here is equal values. So when an exchange is made, they must be numerically equal. So if you spend $1, you must get something worth $1, so that after the trade, you have the same amount numerically, just in a different form. If you do an hour's worth of, if you take an hour's of pay, you should give an hour's work, etc. Legal justice. Now, legal justice regulates what the individual owes to the group. Be it the society, the firm, the family, the state, whatever it might be, whatever group, your obligations to the group are part of legal justice. And the standard here is good order. So the state, the firm, the family has a right to demand what is necessary for good order. And finally, there is social justice. Social justice deals with social institutions, and it applies the 3 kinds of justice to these institutions. And the standard for social justice is the common good. All right. Injustice as reductionism. What is reductionism? Is when you reduce a complex set of truths to just one kind of truth. And in this case, it's the reduction of all justice to one kind. The result is always going to be injustice. So capitalism has a tendency to reduce all justice to commutative justice, just justice in exchange. Socialism has a tendency to reduce all justice to distributive justice. But we must take all 3 forms of justice together to reach a just state or a just economic order, just family, or a just bowling club, whatever it might be. However, there's another level that has to be considered: justice and caritas. Justice is the highest natural virtue, but it is not sufficient. We need, in addition, the supernatural virtue of caritas. That is that is charity. Without seeing all men as brothers and sisters, nothing really works. So, social justice is the practical aspect of love one another. Okay. So, with that in mind, let's ask some let's finish up with some questions. These are questions we can discuss either on both on the online forums and in our discussion sessions. So, the first is economics a pure science? Of course, if it's pure science, then, then the church has no authority, and this course is a waste of your time and mine. But if the answer is no, if it's not a pure science or it's a humane science, then questions of justice cannot be excluded. Now, the same question applies to politics, business, governments, or any human institution. So, what do you think? What are your thoughts on these? So, review the readings and this material, and we'll get together and talk about this. Okay, I'll look forward to seeing you in the discussion groups.